We're joined by Chris Philp, one of the MPs demanding that emergency legislation be brought in, and Dave Ward from the Communication Workers Union supporting the post office strikes. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
Chris, to you first. I mean, do you think there's a conspiracy going on between the unions?
Well, Sean Hoyle, who's the president of the RMT, certainly said so recently. He was on the in the Sunday Times yesterday saying that his objective was nothing to do with workers' conditions or safety. It was about, in his words, bringing down the government and, again, to use his words, replacing capitalism with socialism. And I know he's not your union, Dave, but my constituents and neighbours in Croydon South have suffered months of misery on Southern Rail. Southern Rail's a bad operator and it should go, but the strikes are preventing 300,000 people every day from getting to work. No one's losing their jobs, no one's getting a pay cut. The dispute is over who presses the button to open and close the door.
Which to them is a very serious safety consideration.
It's the future of their careers, it's about the safety of the people on board, that's what they would argue. It's not just about a button press, that's totally devaluing their role and their jobs. It's what they fear the government's doing.
Okay, their jobs have been assured and guaranteed, the pay's been assured. The Rail Safety Standards Board says that using the button is safe. And in the last 5 years, 1.5 million surface trains, that's 1/3 of all surface trains, have run with driver-operated doors without a single fatality. The entirety of London Underground runs with driver-operated doors. So my concern is that over this issue, 300,000 people are being stopped from getting to work, prevented from seeing their families. And I think we need legislation that does two things. Firstly, requires strikes on critical public infrastructure to be reasonable and proportionate. And the High Court, not politicians, the High Court would adjudicate what is reasonable and proportionate. And in my view, in the Southern case, it's not reasonable and proportionate. And secondly, we do what they do in Italy, in Spain and in Canada and say that where there is a strike on critical public infrastructure, it has to be such that you still get a 50% service level. Look, I accept the right to strike completely, but it's got to be reasonable and proportionate.
What strikes in recent times have you supported, Chris?
Well, look, I think if somebody is potentially losing their job or suffering a change to their pension...
Give me a specific example of a strike that you supported. Because very often people say, I support strikes in general, but they very rarely support it specifically. Are you behind the doctors? Are you behind the firefighters?
Behind the post office workers?
What strikes are you specifically supporting in the last 5 years? Let's not go back too far in history to make it hard for you.
Let's take an example. The case that Dave here has at the CWU around post office closures and potential job losses is in my view, a stronger case, much stronger case for striking.
So you would support them striking?
Well, I support their right to strike, yeah, and they've certainly got a stronger case than RMT have, because the RMT and ASLEF are simply causing trouble over, they're claiming it's a safety issue, but when you look into it, the safety issue just isn't there. So I think Dave's union have a much stronger case for striking than the RMT and ASLEF do, and I do support the right to strike, providing it's proportionate and it's reasonable.
That must be music to your ears, Dave, that a Conservative backbench MP is supporting...
I said he had a stronger case. I said he had a stronger case.
It's very, very good that he's supporting our strike.
I didn't say support.
Look, let me be clear that nobody takes strike action without really thinking about the consequences of it and how serious it is to them. Not least, for example, postal workers who face the prospect of losing a lot of money in the run-up to Christmas. And as Chris said, I mean, our strike is actually about the very future of the High Street Post Office. If we don't take action now, then the post office on the High Street will cease to exist.
Yeah, but you're only talking about Crown post offices. I mean, post offices in the back of newsagents and so on, they're not included,
we're talking about the Crown Office network. But of course, the Crown Office network, which is the jewel in the crown, as they say, supports the rural network as well. And what we're saying is it's time for a different debate in this country about business, about companies, about how you grow jobs. And what we're seeing, effectively, is a company and a government that has no strategy whatsoever about the future of this industry.
What people are thinking is, the one time I want to use you guys, you're letting me down. Whereas the private companies, which the government would cheerfully love to use more of, they're doing fine, they're getting stuff through. You're driving people out of needing you.
I don't think we are, Kate, because I think actually the evidence that we've seen is that the vast majority of members of the public and small businesses support this action. We'll be delivering...
when they're present to their grandchildren, don't
Yeah, we'll be delivering tens of thousands of postcards today. The government are undertaking a consultation which closes on the 21st. That's a phony consultation in our view, because we know the reason that the post office have refused to talk to us is because one of the things we offered last week in a written offer, which I personally made to board members, was to call off the strike action, and all we wanted in exchange was an agenda for negotiations and for the company to suspend announcements on further closures and franchising. Now, the reason they're not going to do that is because in January, despite this government consultation, which is completely phony, Chris, they are intending to announce a further programme of franchising and closures of high street post
And what
offices.
would you do? I mean, we were hearing from Clodagh this morning that Theresa May may be considering sort of legislation which would curtail unions' rights to strike.
How would you want, isn't it, Chris?
And how would you respond to that?
Look, we already have the worst legislation, anti-union legislation anywhere across Europe. And I would say to anybody who's really watching this debate about the rights of workers, isn't this a time when workers need more rights, not less? I mean, if you consider it, I do a lot of speeches at rallies and I talk to different people. And I can sense that people in this country at the moment, workers in this country, have never been under as much pressure in recent history to work harder, faster, cheaper, for less. So let's have a wider debate about how you grow businesses and how you grow economies. And it's absolutely vital that unions are there as part of the balance of forces in society to look after workers. And this is an outrageous distraction. The post office is in crisis, the railways are in crisis, the NHS is in crisis, the prison services, and your government just wants to blame.
Dave, you don't grow the economy by having huge amounts of strike action, and we are seeing the biggest increase ever in the minimum wage. And what you've talked about workers' rights, I understand that, I accept that, I understand there is a right to strike. But what about the rights of my neighbours and constituents in Croydon South to get to work on time and to see their families? And 4 weeks of strike action by the RMT and ASLEF, stopping 300,000 people getting to work, is completely disproportionate. Even a Labour MP, Meg Hillier, says that the RMT and ASLEF have gone too far. So I'd like to hear, besides the rights of workers being talked about, which I accept, also the rights of hard-working individuals, their right to get to work and their right to see their family. And there should be a balance. And that's all I'm saying. There should be a balance.
Well, look, when you talked about mediation, I haven't got a problem with mediation. You said that one of the things you'd like to see is everybody...
Compulsory mediation, that's right.
Yeah, but, well, actually, mediation works on a voluntary basis. But the problem that you've got in 9 out of 10 of these disputes that take place is that a company will never take a step back. All it says is we're planning to go ahead. We'll talk to you, but when you get in the room with them, I've been there on many occasions. They just tell you what they're going to do. And mediation, if it's going to work, requires both parties to take a step back. And I would be willing to do that in our situation in the post office strike. But the company has to do the same. If the company's just going to press on regardless, and that's what the RMT and the railway unions are facing, a company who ignores their own customers, their own staff, and doesn't want to sit down and properly debate these things.
Well, they've made all kinds of concessions.
And that's a political dispute. It's your government that's sitting behind that.
With the junior doctors, you talk about compromises. With the junior doctors, there were huge compromises, and that dispute actually got settled. And in fact, it was the BMA Junior Doctors Committee that were acting against the wishes of their wider membership.
I hate to say this because I don't want to be the one to stop debate and discussion. Far from for me particularly, but we'll have to leave it for the moment. We are going to talk more about this, aren't we? But thanks very much indeed. Thank you.